Hi, so I want to talk to you about intimacy and my experience with how it affects borderlines. So, if you listen to the standard description of borderline personality disorder and what happens in romantic relationships, the standard version that you'll hear is that what the borderline is most afraid of is abandonment, which is true. And so what you'll hear if you go and watch videos about borderline personality disorder and dating them is they'll talk about the first phase, which is the idealization phase, which is the seduction, and that part is accurate. My experience was that my BPDX came and seduced me into this perfect woman. She presented herself as not only the perfect woman, but my perfect fantasy of the perfect woman. So much so that I couldn't find anything wrong with her. Now, in hindsight, I look back and there were red flags, and I've talked about that. But those, I just thought maybe that she was a little quirky or, something like that. And we all have little quirks. But she was absolutely 100% focused on being perfect for me. And, but looking back on it, it had more the feel of cotton candy. It was so sugary and so perfect, it lacked depth. That's me looking back on it. Of course, if you are somebody that is targeted by a borderline, it's because you are codependent and they see that. And they are looking to be saved. They're looking for somebody to take away their pain, just like you're looking for somebody to take away your pain. So, that first part is true. They say that what you'll hear is that there will be this first phase of seduction, and then there will be this second phase where they begin to split on you. They haven't destroyed the relationship or left. If you don't understand what's happening, you're still going off of the high of the however many weeks it was that she or he was perfect to you. So they're flipping, going back and forth, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. They make it about you. They gaslight you. You also are trying to figure out, I must have done something. She was so perfect. What did I do? And you're reliving whatever trauma you went through as a kid, as a codependent. But then what you hear, the standard explanation is that what's happening is that the borderline is being triggered because they're afraid of abandonment. And you didn't do something, like you didn't invite them out to eat, or you didn't call, or you didn't text. This is what you'll hear, and that they will have an overreaction to that, which is based on their desire not to be abandoned. And then, of course, the third phase is that they devalue you and destroy the relationship. And I hear that, and I think that it's a superficial understanding. I don't think it's what's really going on. The second part. My experience, if I really analyze it, was the first part of what you hear is true, that they do come in, they love bomb you, they seduce you, they're perfect. They're trying to sell you on how perfect they are so that you will love them and take care of them and be with them and all of that. I think all of that is accurate. The second part, where you're told that what happens is they overreact to little things you do, like you don't text them right away, or you don't call them back, or you say something and they misinterpret it. That's the justification, that's the excuse. Meaning that's the excuse in their brain. And our brains do this. Our brains, when it's trying to protect us, when it responds out of a overreaction trying to protect us, it will justify to us why it's doing what it's doing. Now, we don't know that. We're in a state of emotional desperation and fear, and we're regressed in whatever our childhood trauma is. And so we feel justified. It makes sense to us. Everybody else looks at it and says, that's an overreaction, that's crazy. But we don't have that experience. So it's the same with the borderline. The borderline has that justification in their head. You didn't text me right away. You didn't do this. But the truth of the matter is that you could do that exact same thing 9 out of 10 times and they wouldn't react. So why is it they react that one time? What is it that pushes that button? And again, this can be what makes it so crazy for the codependent is they don't understand. They're trying to figure out, if I can just figure out what it is that sets them off, then I'll know ahead of time and I'll get ahead of it. And you try and do that and it never works, right? They will yell and scream or leave you or abandon you or ghost you or disappear on you or attack you for something, and the reason will be something that in any other given day would not have been the problem. You know, my BPD-X attacked me for things that she herself had said about herself that actually created a bonding experience when we were having the superficial bonding that happens. So it has nothing to do with whatever it is they say or whatever it is you think. What it is, it's the intimacy. The reality is that they are in an extreme expression of a fear of abandonment, which we all go through on some level. You know, the difference between the non-borderline and the borderline is that the non-borderline may have some ability to catch themselves or see it or tolerate the feeling and work through it. But what's really happening is that the borderline is deathly afraid of intimacy, real intimacy. Reason for that is they've never had it. They didn't, the formative years where true intimacy and true love and true bonding occurs when you're an infant and when you're a toddler, that was denied them. And of course that is tremendously traumatic, extremely traumatic. And they are constantly living through that pain of not just abandonment, but living in an empty black hole. So bear in mind, if you're a codependent, you've gone through your own trauma, your own, neglect and whatever else that you've gone through, but there's been enough of the normal childhood bonding that's given you some structure that even though, I'm not saying that anybody's perfect, but you'll have some ability to dig in deep and pull yourself through it, perhaps. Borderlines aren't the only people who destroy relationships and freak out about things, but there is a specific thing about them that makes them, particularly borderline, the cluster B aspect. So what you need to understand if you are a codependent is that you are constantly going to be seeking to create intimacy because you are going to believe that that is what's going to fix the problem. You also are wanting to create the intimacy. What you're doing is that you have attracted, and the attraction for you with the borderline is that you're trying to recreate the abandonment or the trauma or the rejection that you went through as a kid with your parent or your parents or whomever. And so they're representing that, their inability to see you for who you are, their inability to be consistent and love you consistently, and their abuse and rejection is stimulating your need to go back and recreate the trauma that happened to you, and you're going to try and get it right. This time you're going to be the good child, and you're going to love them and give them and whatever it is, and it'll be right this time. You'll get it right. You may not be consciously thinking that, perhaps you are, but on an unconscious level, that's what's happening. So what you're trying to actually achieve is the very thing that will destroy the relationship, because the intimacy is what pushes their buttons. The intimacy is actually so frightening to them because they've never had it. So imagine it's like, it's, you know, this is an extreme example, but you know, scientists say that if we were to engage with an alien race from another dimension or another, you know, world, that the strangeness of it, the inability for us to comprehend it, would be so frightening to us that it would cause, you know, it would make us go crazy. It would cause such tremendous fear. That's what's happening. So I know, you know, if you're BPD, it sounds like I'm saying horrible things about you. What I'm backing you up. That it's absolutely understandable that when real intimacy, true bonding starts to come to you, what ends up happening is that you regress back to that state when you were an infant or when you were a toddler, and you have to feel the horrific pain that must have been happening, that need that was never satisfied. And so you're thrust back into that pain, because what ended up happening is that when you were in that initial first need of intimacy, you were rejected. So you relive the rejection. And it's not the same kind of rejection that non-borderlines experience, because there's still something of us there that we fall back on. Borderlines don't have anything to fall back on. It's just this emptiness. It's horrific. So what I'm trying to say for the non-borderline is that it's doomed. The very thing that brought you together, the promise of the intimacy, because that's what they promise you, they love bomb you, they seduce you with this promise of total intimacy and ultimate acceptance. It's not real. Once that creates in you feelings of love and intimacy and bonding, which you seek to give to them, the real thing then becomes so unbearably frightening for them. They have no choice but to violently reject you. And then, of course, whatever pops into their brain, which is, again, the brain is really good. It'll come up with reasons to explain why it's doing what it's doing when you don't understand. You know, to the credit of my BPD, she had quiet borderline. To her credit, you know, when she was splitting on me, she wouldn't rage. She would just call me on the phone and say, "I had a horrible dream last night. Something's wrong. I just can't be with you." And it would be directly after we had some amazing bonding experience, you know, tears and "I love yous" and "you're the best" and "we're going to create the best together." She, you know, had a real bonding experience. And then all she needed was, you know, a few hours by herself, and, you know, sleep. That's what happens when you dream. Your unconscious is dealing with all of its fears. And so I was stimulating all of those, first the regression back to the pain, because she would say sometimes there's just this horrific shadow and pain, and I feel it coming, and I, you know, she most of the time, you know, couldn't even say why she was splitting on me. She just knew that she was afraid, and that she was afraid of me, and that was it. And it was always after we bonded, always after there was intimacy. And so, you know, and of course, being the codependent who didn't understand borderline, my answer was to reconnect with her, which of course they love that. Reconnect with her and talk to her and explain to her and let her know I was safe, and thinking that if I create the bonding even more, recreate it and go deeper and show her how much I love her, then, you know, she'll get over her initial fear and she'll be able to be there. But that isn't what, in other words, it's going to get worse. Every time that you create the bonding and the intimacy, it will be worse for them. They will not be healed. That time of creating the healing will never happen. So, and I've had, now that I've had time to look back on it, and I've done my therapy, and I've done my, my self-healing, and I've done, my fourth step over all of it, the illusions are gone about what I thought was happening, and I'm able to see it for what it was. And I'm able to see my part, which is really important. I was seeking to replace my soulmate, who really did bond with me and did connect with me, who passed away a couple of years earlier. And I was also trying unconsciously to recreate and fix the trauma and the lack, the dysfunction that happened between me and my mother. So I know my part, and now I know enough about her to know that, that the bonding that I was creating was also creating the perfect storm inside of her, where the only option for her was to reject me. And then the ultimate, and it got worse and worse and worse and worse. And this is what makes you crazy, because you think if you, go to counseling, or you talk to her, or you guys work, that things will get better, that she'll start to trust, and you'll start to trust her and figure her out and know how not to trigger her, which happens in normal relationships. But it only creates things more. I mean, the illusion that they create in themselves when they're love bombing you, because they're not love bombing you just because they're trying to manipulate you. They're love bombing you because they are deluding themselves. They are seducing themselves into you being perfect also. And the only thing that will come out of that is that they will see that you are not the childhood cotton candy fantasy that they're trying to create. The more intimacy you create, the less able they are to project their fantasies onto you, as well as their, the only thing they can project is their fears after that. So again, this is just a long way around of saying that, the deeper you get into it, the more close you get, the more promise of a real relationship that is created, the closer you are to the doom, to the end. It will come. It's just a question of when. It's not a question of if. And in my experience, when my BPDX, when she finally devalued me the last time, she betrayed my trust. And she did everything. She did everything. I could go into it. You guys know what I'm talking about. But literally, there was almost nothing that she could have done that would have been more hurtful and destructive and abusive. And it was, emotional abuse on a level I've never experienced in my life. And I can still see that in her mind, she had no idea that that's what she was doing. And the abuse that she was doing, I could see her seeing herself doing it and having no ability to stop herself. And it's because of there's something inside of them that they have no control over, that's working to protect them. It's like having a protector who's insane and who takes over and wraps around you and says, I'm not going to let you get hurt, and I'm going to destroy that person. And they may even sit there and know that that person loves them, but the protector that's protecting them, they have no control. They can't stop it. It's a survival mechanism that's beyond their control. So the kindest thing you can do with an untreated borderline, if they truly have borderline personality disorder, and not something else, not just have borderline tendencies, but if they have borderline personality disorder, then the kindest thing you can do for them is to say, listen, I love you. I want to be with you, but this relationship for me is very toxic, and I don't know how to be in it without causing myself harm. I have to leave. I can't have any contact with you. If you do want to have contact with me, call me in a year after you've been in therapy with a therapist who's qualified to treat borderline personality disorder. And if you do that regularly 2 or 3 times a week for a year, give me a call. I say that because it's not going to happen. They're not going to do that. The 1 in 10,000 that has the desire and the ability to do that, great. But I'm pretty certain that they won't do that. And if you do that, you set that kind of a boundary, you'll be very strong in yourself. And that is the kindest thing you can do, because that's really what they need. They don't need to be in a relationship with you, no matter how much you love them. You can't help them. You're keeping them in their delusion. They need to learn on their own to be single and to learn how to love themselves and understand their behavior and how it affects others, and things that I'm not qualified to do because I'm not a therapist and I don't have the training to help heal borderlines. And then you have to get help. You've got to go. I recommend going to a 12-step group like Codependents Anonymous, working that 4th step, that resentment inventory, and then working with a sponsor. And I recommend getting therapy with a qualified psychologist who can help you with your codependence. All right? That's it. See you guys later.